right, welcome to your lesson on balancing equations. So, balancing equations starts with the law of conservation of mass, which states that atoms cannot be created or destroyed. You cannot make an atom out of nothing, and you cannot take an atom and make it completely disappear. In a chemical reaction, what that means is the amount of reactants equals the amount of products. So remember, the reactant is the left side of the equation and the product is the right side, the right side of the arrow. The law of conservation of mass is also known as the law of conservation of atoms. So the number of atoms of each type of element must be the same on the left side and the right side of the equation. And we know that they're not always that way, but you can rearrange things to make them that way. And notice I said rearrange. We're not creating or destroying, we're just moving so that they're equal. Okay, so hydrogen plus oxygen yields water. So that arrow, remember, is called the yield sign. So hydrogen and oxygen are both diatomic elements. They don't exist by themselves. They exist in pairs. So always two hydrogens together. There are always two oxygens together. So here we have H2 plus O2 yields H2O. Well, if you look at the left side and we count our atoms, there's two hydrogens on the left and there's two hydrogens on the right. There's two oxygens on the left, but there's only one oxygen on the right. So this is not a balanced equation. We cannot change subscripts. Subscripts are the little tiny number on the bottom, right? The subscripts on water, we can't change that. We can't just stick a 2 by the O and make it H2O2, because then we're violating the law of conservation of mass, or atoms, and we're creating atoms, which we can't do. We can only add coefficients until they're balanced. So coefficient is the big number that would come before, and so we're going to work through a few of these together to do that. The main thing here is that you're able to count atoms, because if you can count atoms, then you will be able to know if it's balanced or not. And the skills you need in order to count atoms, the only math skill you need is to be able to do the distributive property. And I know you can all do that, so this is not nearly as scary as it looks. All right, so the first thing, you're going to identify the reactant side and the product side. So the reactant side is always the left, the product side is the right. Then you're going to draw a line, I like squiggly lines, coming down from the yield sign to separate it into left and right. And you're going to list out the elements on each side of the arrow. After you've listed them, then you're going to count how many of each there are, and then you begin balancing. And you might have to go back and forth a couple times until everything's balanced out. All right. Here we go. Here's where it froze. Okay, so if you can't change the subscripts, then how can the atoms be made equal? Well, we can change the coefficient, big number before the letter. So that's the big red 2. That's a coefficient. So we put a big 2 before that, which, using the distributive property, 2 times 2, because the big 2 times the 2 by the H is 4. Now our H's aren't balanced, but our O's are balanced. So now we have to go over to the reactant side, figure out what to do to that in order to make it balanced. Well, if you add a coefficient of 2 on the left side, it makes H now 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. And it is now balanced because the proper number of coefficients were added. You cannot take away or add the little numbers. You can add big numbers. All right, let's try another one. So we have nitrogen and hydrogen, which yields ammonia. So N2 plus H2 yields NH3. So you're going to start off by counting. So on the left side we have 2 N's, on the right side we have 1, because notice that little 3 next to the H. That goes to the H, it doesn't go to the N. And we have 2 H's on the left and 3 H's on the right. So we do not, nothing is balanced. Our N's aren't balanced and neither. So first balance the nitrogen by placing a coefficient of 2 in front of NH3. What that does is makes N2, and then 2 times 3 is 6. It makes H6. So now hydrogen isn't balanced. We're going to place a 3 in front of H2, and that's going to make hydrogen 6. Now everything is balanced. There's also things called polyatomic ions. We're actually not going to get into these. The word poly means many, so all this means is many atoms. So when you look at this looks crazy busy, and it is, and you won't do this kind of balancing until you get to physical science, chemistry class. But you would just follow the same steps that we just did, except you don't break apart polyatomic ions. So it's actually much easier to figure these things out. Again, we're not going to do these, but the main thing you need to keep in mind for law of conservation of mass is that you can change the big numbers, you can add big numbers, but you cannot change the small numbers because that means you are creating or destroying atoms. Cannot do that.